This is OCCN 2020.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Candidates, sponsored by the Oberlin Community Candidates Night Planning Committee. I am Ray English, a resident of Oberlin and a member of the Oberlin City Council. Joining me tonight are Allison Ricker and Lily Sandler, members of the Candidates Night Committee. We are with the candidates for the office of Prosecuting Attorney of Lorain County, Robert Gargas and J.D. Tomlinson. Before we begin, let me encourage viewers to read about the candidates and their answers to questions from the League of Women Voters site at vote411.org. The responsibility of the county prosecutor, as summarized at vote411.org, is, and I quote, to investigate and prosecute crimes committed within the county, to defend the county in court, and to give legal advice to county agencies and townships, unquote. We will begin with 2-minute statements from the candidates and then move to questions from the Candidates Night Committee and from those submitted by community members. Mr. Gargas, please begin with your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. English, and thank you to the Conversation with Candidates Committee putting this together. I would like to ask for the people to vote for me because of my experience as a lawyer, 37 years practicing law in Lorain County, Ohio. Have done pretty much almost everything a lawyer could do, from private practice to government practice. I've worked as a city prosecutor in Lorain. I've worked on the contractual side of municipal corporations, integration and defense of political subdivisions, have prosecuted criminals in the municipal court, have prosecuted felonies in the municipal court through their binding over to the grand jury, have worked with the police department, worked with the sheriff's office, have engaged clients in both civil and criminal perspectives in dealing with political subdivisions. I've had the opportunity to represent the Lorain Port Authority, Lorain City Council, the City of Lorain. When Mike Sherrock was the law director, I was involved in the defense of the city and in all of its civil litigation. I have a varied experience that I don't believe that my opponent has, and that's why I believe I am the better choice. Not to take anything away from Mr. Tomlinson's youth and experience, but I believe that I would be a better candidate to be elected. I think that our philosophies perhaps are distinguishable. I'm a constitutional conservative, and perhaps Mr. Tomlinson has a bit of a more liberal agenda. So that's why I would ask you to vote for me. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the committee for having me. Attorney Gargas, hello. Listen, I think that I want to give a little bit about my background. I graduated from Oberlin College with an economics degree in 2003. I then graduated from Case Western Reserve University in 2006, began practicing criminal defense work exclusively for the last 13 years. And that's what I've done, is defend the criminally accused. It gives me a unique perspective. And I think almost any county prosecutor should do that for a significant amount of time. However, I believe my endorsements kind of to tell a big story, and it's diverse, and it's a coalition. Police, fire, sheriff's deputies, sheriff's committee, labor organizations, AFL-CIO, tons of labor organizations, teachers organizations. It's a wide array, it's a wide coalition. And I think that the reason that they do this is I think that I've reached out to them over these last 4 years because I ran for this position when I was 35, I'm 39 now. And in doing so, I've created relationships and developed those. And I think that really that's what separates me is my endorsements. In addition, I believe the future of law enforcement is community policing. And what does that mean? That means a greater interaction between members of law enforcement officers and the community at large. And what do I mean by that specifically? Well, if you look on Facebook, as I'm sure everybody's a part of now, you'll see videos of police officers that stop while they're cruising the neighborhoods, and they stop and they get out and they take time to actually communicate with the kids, play basketball or football or games with the children. In doing that, it creates trust between those communities that's really lacking right now. And I've seen really that make wondrous efforts in Lorraine. We're lucky enough to have chiefs of police in all these communities. They're on board. Sheriff Stamidi, I know, is on board. I've spoke with him at length about the issue. That's the future. We need to get on board now, but we need youth in that county prosecutor's office. I'm 39 years old. I'm almost 40. I've got plenty of energy. And I believe, with all due respect to Attorney Gargas, I'm the future of the county prosecutor's office.
Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to questions. And the first question will be for you, Mr. Tomlinson, to respond to first, and then Mr. Gargas. What is your political philosophy? Is it conservative or liberal? And how does it relate to what you will do as county prosecutor? And how might it influence your approach in criminal cases?
Well, you know, I don't particularly like labels the older I get. However, I don't think I really fit into either of those. I think I would probably describe myself as left of center. I'm a reasonable person. I wish there was a political party that was for reasonableness, because I think there's a place for that in politics. But I would say, I'm a Democrat. I'm running as a Democrat. But I don't like to label, because I'm very issue specific on how I feel. I might not have certain viewpoints that a typical liberal would have, or in some circumstances I would. So it's very difficult to kind of label myself. I find it the more difficult the older I get to do it. When I was young, I was certain what I was, you know. But as far as influencing my decision making, it has none. It has none. I don't believe it has any place in prosecuting cases. I think you have to be objective. And I think this is not a position for hyper partisanship. Because if I'm a Democrat and I'm a hyper partisan and you're a Republican and I'm prosecuting you, how can you possibly believe that I'm going to be fair and distribute justice to you fairly? I don't believe that the prosecutor's office is a place for hyper partisanship.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gargas, the same question.
Sure, and I agree with JD that there's no place in the prosecutor's office for politics. And that's one of the reasons why I actually decided to run for this office, because I've seen that the politics of Lorain County has, for the last 37 years, been practiced in the prosecutor's office. And I intend to put an end to that. As far as how politics involves in prosecution, well, the fact that it exists sometimes suppresses people's abilities to bring forward crimes that they know exist in the public sector. And a lot of times, if you have someone that's brave enough to blow the whistle on someone, they don't know who they can trust. And if they go to certain people, you know, certain things get swept under the rug. And there's been times over the years when we've referred people to go to the prosecutor's office with their stories and information and facts, and they've laid it out and didn't go anywhere. And the only reason, in my opinion, that it never went anywhere is because the powers to be suppressed it. And so that's all going to change in a Gargas administration. I am a constitutional conservative. I don't owe anyone anything. Okay, over the years, it's cost me because I'm not a yes man. People would say, well, why is it that, you know, you didn't prosecute? I wanted this done, and I didn't think it was there. I wouldn't prosecute. I mean, I've stood up to the powers to be many times to my own disadvantage, because I didn't give them the answer that they wanted to have or the cover that they wished to have. And so any opportunity that I have as prosecutor to do justice, that's my goal, is to seek the facts and to do justice. And that's really how I intend to operate the office. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go on to the second question. And Mr. Gargas, if you would respond first to this question. What do you believe to be the root causes for the high numbers of juvenile offenders, and what changes can the court system make to reduce those numbers?
The lawlessness that we are having to endure coming from juvenile justice, I think, has to do just with the fact that they've left their moralities, okay, aside. They're not being properly educated. There's not been sufficient religious instruction. There has not been parental guidance. Society as a whole, in the schools in particular, have started against education that should instill in a moral compass for these students. I think that the courts have been engaging with the juvenile justice system to be able to rehabilitate children that made mistakes and needed to be redirected. And I think the systems that exist currently treat that. I think our exposures of juveniles to drug abuse and alcohol and various forms of addictive substances, that they're easy marks for the purveyors, for the traffickers. These criminals, they need to be taken off the streets, and certainly that would impact the menacing circumstances that these juveniles some juveniles are having to endure. I know that in certain times, a parent, a child has to raise the family. And so I think children's services could be employed in a more effective fashion. And that's a very important area of the prosecutor's office that I will be seeking to protect and advance.
Thank you. Mr. Tomlinson, same question.
Yes, thank you. I guess we'd have to first operate, under the premise that there has been an increase. I'm a data kind of guy, so I'd like to see the data under that assertion or that underlying kind of premise. But any juvenile offending is too much, I would assume. It's important. The juvenile division of the county prosecutor is important. I've been practicing it for 13 years. I was born, you only have one opportunity to choose your parents. The joke being you can't choose your parents. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a very, relatively well-adjusted home. And it was a luck that isn't bestowed upon everybody. And even as a child, I realized how lucky I was to have two parents in the home, first of all, and two parents that were really supportive of me. And so obviously the family unit's always important. It's always going to be important. Now you can have non-traditional families. It's fine. Family is a very wide-ranging word. And we have to be very careful not to kind of always say that a nuclear family as we traditionally know it is always going to be the healthiest, because it's not always the healthiest. But a good family unit, whatever you define that to be, is always going to be important when it comes to youth. For those that don't have that, it's very difficult. I can't imagine. I try to place myself in the position of if one of my parents weren't home or one of my parents was abusive or abused substances, how would that affect me? But the truth of the matter is you don't know unless you're that individual. Well, how do we do something about it? Well, what we have to do is, first of all, mentoring programs are always important. To have that figure in your life that, I was lucky enough to not only have my father and mother, but I had very influential mentors around me. And I was kind of surrounded by mentors during my life. And that was always very important because you gather something from each one of those individuals. So mentoring is big. After school programs, especially in more at-risk areas. And maybe this is where my youth comes in, but I can still play basketball a little bit. And not real well anymore, but I can still play. And I went out a couple weeks ago and I was invited by members of the Lorraine Police Department to engage the children in after-school basketball programs. And it was wonderful. I played for 2 hours, and I got to enjoy the children, and they asked questions, and I was able to just to have them knowing that you care enough to show up is big for them. And I remember I missed the next week, and the officer said, "Hey, listen, they're already asking about you, so you got to get back out there." So that's something that I intend to be involved in personally. I want to be personally involved, especially in the at-risk programs. I mean, more affluent neighborhoods, I would probably venture to say that those statistics would be lower. Not that there isn't problems in affluent neighborhoods, because there is. Like Attorney Gargas spoke about, substance abuse knows no socioeconomic boundaries. But I'd like to start beginning with where the data shows I'm more likely to be effective, and those would be the more at-risk communities. And I want to be directly involved. And like I said, it all comes back to me as community policing, creating that trust, not seeing the prosecutor's office necessarily as a stick, but maybe as a carrot. And maybe I can be encouraging rather than just always punishing. But that's part of my job too. Well, not the job. The judge does the sentencing, but I would be part of the, whether you get charged with a criminal offense or not. So those are really the I think the areas where we can improve the most and see really effective change.
Okay, thank you. Going on to the next question, and for you to respond to first, Mr. Tomlinson, what is your position on seeking the death penalty? When do you think it is appropriate, and when is it not appropriate?
The death penalty is a very, very heavy issue for me. It's something that I've struggled with, I think, since I was, politically conscious. It's the law of the land. I suppose, could there be a case that would come across my desk? Factually, it's very difficult to tell you what it would look like. There's a lot of different elements that have to go into whether or not you charge somebody with that particular potential penalty. So I can't tell you what a case would look like. I don't know until I see it, I suppose. But let me tell you what the problems I have with it. It's permanent. It's permanent, and it's expensive. I think that one of the best arguments that those that are against the death penalty have is that it's economically more, it's cheaper to believe it or not. It's counterintuitive, but it's cheaper. And I'm not so certain that it's a better penalty. I'm not so sure which is a worse penalty, to be perfectly frank with you. But it's something I struggle with because of the permanence is really what bothers me. I mean, when you see cases that a man is exonerated after 20 years from DNA, for example, and if we had to put that man to death, that the tragedy of losing one innocent man to a death penalty is very significant to me. So as I said, it's something that I would be extremely careful with and thoughtful about. And I guess I can't tell you unless the situation arises, but just it is the law of the land. Until that's changed, then the death penalty is available to the county prosecutor's office.
Thank you. Mr. Gargas, same question.
Sure. The death penalty is warranted every time an officer of the law is executed by a criminal. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've had plenty of examples of that, haven't we? Even caught on security cameras where some criminal will walk up to the officers and shoot them in the head, kill them. I mean, just this week we had in Louisville, right? An officer shot in the stomach, okay? Got under his vest, shot him in the stomach. Now I hope the man doesn't die. But the death penalty is laid out in Ohio as a penalty. Mr. Tomlinson's right. And it will be my judgment to make based upon the facts that I have. But in order to qualify, for instance, let me give you another example. Say a murder occurred to a child who had been raped, violated. I mean, under the facts existing, that person could suffer the death penalty. Aggravated circumstances existing. These are all points that I would have to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And once I got the jury to accept the fact of the guilt of the underlying crime, then there would be a trial over whether or not the man's life should be taken. And, it would be my job as the advocate to produce the evidence so that the death penalty could be provided by that jury. And then even after that point, the judge still has the ability to temper the death penalty and it would be my obligation, my burden to prove to the common police court judge that the death penalty is warranted and that the decision of the jury should be maintained. And then from that point on, whatever the decision is, if the death penalty is provided, then we would be going directly to the Ohio Supreme Court, and it would be the duty of my office, my oath, to do my very level best to maintain that judgment of the court. So I believe in the death penalty. I believe that it needs to be there so that those that deserve the ultimate punishment receive it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. And moving on to the next question for you to respond to first, Mr. Gargas. What are your views related to the underrepresentation of women and people of color in the court system? Do you have strategies to address concerns in these areas?
Yes, I do. And I've even asked the Urban League to give me a list of potential qualified people who could serve in those capacities. Now, just when I started practicing law 37 years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Ralph Brooks. And Ralph was a Black attorney. He worked with Norman Beller. There weren't many, John Howard. There really weren't that many. There was Paul Payne, when I started in '83. But I respected them. Today we've got Freddie Springfield, who is who works, within the court system in the prosecutor's office, I believe. And, there just doesn't seem to be a population of lawyers in Lorain County that there should be. And I think the Bar Association and different groups have tried to stimulate that. But I really don't like to look at a person's color, okay? I would really want to see the content of their character, like Martin Luther King has stated. And I think that everyone that works within our office needs to be colorblind. We need to appreciate the fact that everyone has a different experience. I've not walked a mile in anyone else's shoes but mine. Yet I know that other people have had very divergent, very different travels. And it's my job to try to understand the individuals. And it's also my job to make sure that we have the highest and greatest number of qualified individuals who are dedicated to seeking justice. And that's what I would attempt to populate my staff with. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tomlinson?
Yes, thank you. I attended law school from 2003 to 2006, and I think that the trend had already been well in place at that time that women were increasing their attendance at law schools around the country. I believe if you looked at the statistics, that would still show true. I actually believe that women may make up more than 50% of the students in law school currently. So it looks like we're making some endways into that kind of gender problem when it comes to lawyers. When I go to the courtroom today, I find that there is a nice percentage of women that are lawyers, and it's nice to see, and they're talented like everybody else, and we're all trying to do our level best. I'm with Attorney Gargas in the sense of, I hope we can get to a point where we never have to look at gender or never have to look at color. That's always important to state. But as far as, having especially people of color involved in law enforcement, I think that's important. It's important that communities their law enforcement maybe reflect the way that those communities are. I think that's always easier for those in the community to have some trust, because that lack of trust is there as we kind of see in today's society. So I think it's always a good thing to have law enforcement be representative of the people that live in that particular community. And what can we do to do that? Well, we can recruit, but that's difficult sometimes. It's difficult sometimes to Because of some of the stigmas that happened in some communities about law enforcement, it's kind of difficult to recruit from those particular communities. But it's something that maybe we can try as much as we can to encourage. As far as representation in my office, yes, I absolutely want my office to be diverse. Diverse opinions and cultures and people are what keeps areas vibrant. I think that's always important. But I want qualified, diverse groups of people. And I want to have a kind of prosecutor's office that's known to be somewhere where you can go and really learn and try cases and do the right thing and make interesting decisions. And I think that if we create a kind of an excitement where people want to come and practice with that particular office, we can gather and get those recruits that may not be present currently.
Okay, thank you. Next question, again for you to respond to first, Mr. Tomlinson. How will you ensure equal protection under the law? And specifically, how will you ensure that people of color are not treated differently from whites when they're accused of crimes and prosecuted?
Well, I think it's important for a county prosecutor to hold law enforcement accountable when they've done wrong. Now that's a difficult. It's difficult because I don't like to kind of make blanket statements about certain groups. So what I mean by that is any particular case that comes in front of me that involves law enforcement officer, it's important to look at them objectively as to those facts. It's very important. And so really the reality of it is, and I like to view myself as extremely independent. I don't feel beholden to any particular groups. I was an outsider, and I guess you're an outsider until you become elected. Now you become the insider, but I'm an outsider, and so going against the party county prosecutor, it created this kind of the independence that I enjoy, that I don't feel particularly beholden to anybody. And so I think that having somebody that doesn't have those kind of links and those ties, and somebody that just will look at any particular case based on the facts itself. Color, creed, religious beliefs have nothing to do with that decision. And I think that that's the only way you can make sure that people are treated fairly, regardless of color or gender or race.
Mr. Gargas?
Yeah, racism is what we're talking about. Being colorblind on what you're doing. In the defense world, when I practice defense law on a regular basis, I always use the analogy that my client, first and foremost, I zealously represented them. Many times I made the prosecutors kick a field goal. They weren't going to be permitted to score a touchdown. And I expect the same kind of robust zealousness on behalf of the people that are going to be defending criminals. But again, I got to tell you, it didn't matter to me what color my client was, and it's not going to matter to me what color, the alleged criminal is, nor is it going to matter to me the color of the victims. I mean, these are human beings, citizens of Lorain County, that I am going to protect. The victims, the criminals, they're going to have to pay their price. I have not been quiet on the fact that if you're a criminal, you need to leave Lorain County, because I'm not going to have any kind of mercy for you. And that sounds terrible, but that's not my job. My job is to do justice. And the justice that I intend to do is going to be victim driven. So when I talk to that victim and I find out exactly how this crime has impacted them, you as a criminal are going to have to take care of the victim's demands. And it is able to be demanded through me. And this is important because having that office and the power of that office, you can cause criminals to do things that other lawyers cannot do. You have an ability to coerce them into doing things, into demanding that they do certain things to be able to satisfy the demands of a victim. And in my years as prosecutor in Lorain, I certainly use that authority. I know how to use it. It's very effective. And I intend to use it for all victims in Lorain County to get you the most perfect justice that I can. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Gargas. If you would respond to this final question first. Ideally, a prosecutor is looking for truth, not just going for convictions. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you plan to put those thoughts into action?
You know, you're exactly correct. The prosecutor's obligation is to seek justice. It is not to seek a conviction. So when we originally begin the criminal process at the felony level, when the case is bound over and we sit down with a grand jury, okay, the grand jury can be the sword and it can also be the shield. So it is our duty to determine fact. And that fact is going to come from the law enforcement personnel. It's going to come from the witnesses and from what is investigated. And at that point, the grand jury is going to sift through those facts and determine whether or not a crime was committed and whether or not the defendant committed the crime. And if they so find that is the case, they're going to issue a true bill of indictment. And that true bill of indictment is going to allow us then to proceed forward with criminal charges being filed in the common pleas court and then prosecuted. And it is at that level where all of my staff and myself, we're really blind, to what the color of the person's skin is. And so I think that everyone doing their job, upholding their oath, making sure that the Constitution of Ohio and the United States of America are maintained, allows us to have a clash, if you will, a zealous clash of lawyers in front of a judge, and if necessary, a trial, and then the sentence. And one of the things that we'll be able to do in the prosecutor's office as well is to raise issues to the judge at sentencing. Sometimes I don't know that it's actually being done as regularly and as systematically as necessary, but recommendations as to punishment to make sure that the police's concerns, that there's no slapping on the wrists occurring, all of this is going to be administered, by my staff, but ultimately I'm going to be looking over everything that goes on in that office. And so it's going to have my seal of approval on it. And we will not permit racism whatsoever to exist in any of our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question, Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes, thank you. During my 13 years of practice, is what I found is that I think the average citizen really doesn't know how difficult, first of all, justice is to administer, and also how beautifully the system can work. And let me explain by that. Anytime I've thought I've had a truly innocent client, and my job was never to determine innocence, that's a jury or a fact finder's job, but anytime I really felt as if I had an actual innocent client, not somebody that I thought that the state couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt they were guilty, but actual innocence, those cases were typically dismissed. I can almost tell you that I think almost every single one of them was dismissed. And what happens? How does that happen? Well, as you get involved in the matter and you're hired to take on the matter, you start doing your due diligence, and you talk with witnesses, and you speak with everybody involved, police officers. You go over the reports and medical reports or any other discovery that may be in the file. And what you do is you start investigating, really. And what happens is, with actual innocence, you'll get evidence of that, and you'll get evidence that would exonerate clients. And as you come across that evidence, and you because there's dual discovery, there's both sides have to give discovery to the other. So when every prosecutor I've ever had with one of these cases, when you give them evidence, it starts to show. And so what ends up happening is the prosecutor's office typically get lists of evidence or list of witnesses. They speak with those witnesses, and they draw the conclusion that they've got a problem with this case and that they may have actual innocence. So I think that it actually happens more than what people might believe, is that you can get these cases dismissed that where you feel you have innocent clients. So it does happen. Now, has there been innocent people who have been convicted? Sure, absolutely. Every day, I'm sure. But the system tries its hardest to stop that from happening. And that's why they have the burden so high. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest burden that we have in our legal system. And why is that? Well, because they want to make it difficult to convict innocent people. And what happens as a result of that? Well, what happens is some guilty people will walk, and that's the price to pay for a system where we try very hard to not convict innocent people. So that's always I think important to kind of mention about the legal system that I find beautiful. I think the major way of seeking truth is to always be willing to change your mind. Never be dogmatic. Always be objective. Always be willing to challenge your underlying premises. I think that that's the only way where you can truly seek truth, is to be willing to change your mind. And it's not about winning. And so I think that when you ask about convictions, convictions are not important to me at all. I mean, I want the truth every time, and I want those that are guilty to be convicted. So conviction rates are not as important as justice. And so that's how I would make sure that I seek truth over convictions, is that you just have to be willing to be open.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to closing statements of 2 minutes each, and we'll start with you, Mr. Tomlinson.
Sorry, I go back and forth with the mute. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. It's always interesting speaking with people about ideas, and I appreciate Attorney Gargis, his participation. I can say this: Attorney Gargis has been a true gentleman throughout the process, and I appreciate that, especially in these days of politics. It's rare to find, and I want to thank him publicly about that. Listen, I think that my endorsements really do kind of tell the story. It's such a wide array. I think the county prosecutor's office is such a powerful position that most people don't know about. And so in these last 4 years of really being heavily involved in campaigning, I went door to door. And in those 4 years, I can't tell you how many doors I had knocked, 10, 12, 15,000. My father and I, he would pick me up at my home, and we'd go out for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And so talking with people is what I've been doing for the last 4 years. Working hard to get to almost every house I can. And my first question when I go to someone's house is usually, is there anything you'd like to talk about? I'm here to kind of help you answer questions. And so I was able to do that. And in doing that, I was able to gain these really important endorsements from civil service of the community, police, fire, sheriff's deputies. Sheriff deputies hadn't endorsed a candidate in 13 or 15 years. And they did me. So I think that I'm able to avail myself to the community, and hopefully they trust me. And I think that there's some signals that they have by these endorsements that are very important to me. Labor's huge in my heart. I grew up in a labor union family. To have those endorsements is very important to me, and I think they're telling. And so that's really, I think, what separates me in this race. In addition, I have enthusiasm. I have energy. I'm relentless. I think that my stances and my desire to get involved in community policing personally is what also separates me. And so I think that, the prosecutor's office can be so influential and create such good in the community. I really want to maximize that. And the only way to maximize it is to get out there and be with the community. I want to be kind of the people's prosecutor. I want to be available. You'll see me at Giant Eagle. You'll see me at the gym. You'll see me when things, permit that. So I want to be available to the community for questions and concerns, criticism. And I think that my experience as a criminal defense attorney for 13 years has given me a unique perspective that's seen it from the other side. I think that creates the ability to be fair. And I just want to be fair. I want to make the right decision, even if it hurts me. That's just kind of how I am. So I just hope that the voters will see that and perhaps cast a vote for me on November 3rd. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Mr. Gargis.
Yes, thank you. I also want to thank you, Raymond, for the moderation and for the conversations with the candidates event. And I also want to congratulate my opponent, because he too has been a gentleman. law and order is what the people want to have. I think I've heard that from several politicians. I'm not a politician. I'm just a lawyer. When I graduated in 1983 and passed the bar, I opened up my shingle at 2626 Broadway and have worked here for 37 years. I've raised two boys who are both young men, and I've been married for 40 years. I've got two grandchildren. So I want to make sure that this society that we have, that I enjoyed, is here after I'm gone. And I intend to train the next generation of prosecutors for Lorain County, Ohio. You know, it's kind of like I get to ride the ship as captain maybe for 4 years or so, but I'm going to instill within the people that are there the conservative values and the law and order side of things that need to be propagated so that the future of Lorain County will be as bright as its past. Now, I know we're going through some difficult times, and I know that finances have been impaired in many ways, and so too have the finances of our political subdivisions been impaired. One of my goals will be to help the political subdivisions with their accounting and transparency so that they can better get through and survive what is coming relative to financial distress. One of my main practices is bankruptcy. I believe that I could help in this way. Chapter 9s are probably going to become prevalent in the future. We need to be able to maintain constitutional standards. I know that there's many things that I'd like to have done as a father, coaching my son's baseball teams, football teams. I had to give up all of that because I had a law practice and I had clients to take care of. And while I certainly believe that the youth should be engaged and so forth, I have to tell you that the job that we're going to be undertaking as county prosecutor, I fully anticipate to be sleeping many nights in the office trying to get through the work and making sure that the work is getting done in the excellence of manner that I expect. So I would ask the people, you know, to understand that justice is the goal that we're both after, and that it will be my pleasure in giving back to the community my service to promote honesty, transparency, diligence, and law and order. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both, Robert Gargas and J.D. Tomlinson, candidates for Lorain County Prosecutor.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for watching. The OCCN has been a nonpartisan collaboration for more than 25 years. Here are the 10 organizations that participated in the planning effort for 2020. We thank them all.